Okay, a few more comments on the Phillips curve, and then we'll go into the Laffer curve here, and that'll wrap up chapter 38. So the final comments on the Phillips curve here. Um, if you're told that an economy is in recession, draw a graph of the Phillips curve showing that the economy is in recession. So you'd start off, I recommend you always start off with the long run Phillips curve at the natural rate of unemployment, the NRU, okay? LRPC. Then draw your short run Phillips curve, SRPC. And if the economy is in recession, that means that unemployment is high and inflation is probably low, so we're out here. That would be the position of an economy in recession. If you're told that the economy is suffering inflation and is operating beyond full employment, that would be a point up here. Okay, short run Phillips curve, you'd identify a point up here. We talked in the earlier video about the things that shift the Phillips curve to the right and to the left. We also talked about the meaning of this point right here. This is the point that, given the circumstances that create this particular short run Phillips curve number one, this is the expected rate of inflation. So expected, E-X-P-E-C-T-E-D, inflation. Okay. If we wind up in recession and the government doesn't do anything about it, so this would be a throwback to before the modern era, back in the early 20th century, when everybody was laissez-faire and said, leave the economy alone, it'll self-correct. People would become used to this lower level of inflation, input prices would drop, the short-run aggregate supply curve would shift to the right, and the short-run Phillips curve would shift to the left. So that would be the natural adjustments if government didn't take any corrective action. All right, but usually government does step in. They try to give a stimulus package to an economy that's in recession, and typically we get back to that inflation level. We slide back up here as long as the SR, short-run aggregate supply, SRAS, has not moved. All right, so that kind of wraps up the Phillips curve. Well, one more thing on the Phillips curve. What would cause the long-run Phillips curve to shift to the right or to the left? Well, it would be a change in the natural rate of unemployment. What determines the natural rate of unemployment? And remember that we're at the natural rate of unemployment. In other words, we're at full employment whenever we have only frictional and some structural unemployment. There's no cyclical unemployment, okay? So a change in frictional unemployment would shift the long-run supply curve, long-run Phillips curve, one way or the other. Let's say that unemployment benefits are bolstered, they rise, and people are actually have longer access to unemployment benefits and more money on unemployment. There's less incentive to work. So the natural rate of unemployment would rise and the long-run Phillips curve would shift to the right. If we cut unemployment benefits, eliminate them or reduce them significantly, shorten the amount of time people can be on unemployment, more people are motivated to go out there and find a job, natural rate of unemployment would fall. LRPC would shift to the left, okay? Structural unemployment, anything we can do to reduce structural unemployment. So if we have tremendous re-education programs for people can, within 4 to 8 weeks, get retrained for a new job, and new jobs are available out there. Structural unemployment falls, and NRU would shift to the left. If the structural unemployment rises, NRU is going to shift to the right. So the long-run Phillips curve is based on things that change frictional or structural unemployment. All right, we're going to stop this and talk about the Laffer curve very briefly. To tell you the truth, I cannot imagine the Laffer curve is going to be on this year's test, but it's a simple concept. You need to know it. There's a long story behind the derivation of the Laffer curve that I'll tell you in a real quick nutshell here. During the early 1970s, some conservative economists and politicians were getting together and talking about their feelings that taxes were way too high. We needed a tax revolution to reduce tax rates, but we needed to convince the American people, the voters, that lower tax rates were crucial to the economy expanding. They found this guy, Arthur Laffer, who had been writing about tax rates and had this thought that the higher the tax rate, the less incentive there is for people to work because you're taking away so much of their money. And so if people don't work as much, the GDP falls short, and even a high tax rate doesn't collect very much money for the government. Government revenues, tax revenues, would fall if tax rates got too high. Of course, if tax rates are very, very low, government revenues fall also. So somewhere in the middle, somewhere at a tax rate that is ideal, we would maximize government revenues. He wound up drawing this particular graph. In your book, we put the tax rate on the vertical axis. And we put tax revenues, government tax revenues, on the horizontal axis. Remember, tax revenue is the amount of tax the government collects and then has to put into its budget. At a very, very low tax rate, say, at 0% tax rate, the government would collect zero revenue, right? As the tax rate increases, the government would collect more revenue, okay? And you might think that, the higher the tax rate, the more the government collects. But Arthur Laffer pointed out that there is a point where you get diminishing returns on tax rates. And at a certain tax rate X, whatever that might be, we don't know the number, the government is taxing people so much that they are refusing to work, okay? They're growing vegetables in their own backyard to eat, I guess, I don't know. Or they're hiding their money. They got a huge incentive to do work but not report it to the government, to hide their income somehow. And tax rates start to fall. And if you tax people an excessive amount, let's say you tax them 100% of their income, people will say, screw that, I'm not working at all, or I'm certainly not reporting any of my income to you. We're not going to do that. So this becomes the Laffer curve. At some point, the government maximizes revenues. And the question is, are we currently at a tax level below that, where higher taxes would in fact yield a little more revenue, maybe not a lot, but a little more revenue, because this is getting pretty steep curve here? Or are we at a tax rate above that, where actually, believe it or not, if we cut the tax rate lower, we'll collect more revenue? So that's the idea of the Laffer curve. And that the thinking behind that in the early 1970s led to something called supply-side economics. If you look for supply-side economics in our textbook, you will find it. Look it up in the index there, and you can read a little bit about it. It's not a big deal on the AP exam, certainly. You might wind up covering it when you get to your college classes, depending on the desires of the professor that you have for your economics class. There's no homework questions for chapter 38. I had you already had you do a few free response questions that you've already turned in. I'm going to assign some the MyAP Unit 4 multiple choice questions and FRQs. Okay, they're going to be posted in the next few minutes here, right around noon, I guess. Yeah, it's 11:30 now. So right around noon, they'll be posted. And that's what you need to do. You need to do it today. During class would be a great time, between 12 and 2. If you are working on a AP government exam, then later this afternoon, hopefully you'll get to the economics and you'll do the MyAP Unit 4 multiple choice and free response questions. I've given you a 35-minute time limit for the 21 multiple choice questions and a 35-minute time limit for the 2 free response questions. But this is, again, more practice in doing them and uploading them. taking a good photograph and uploading the free response questions. All right, so be looking for that.